Hello and welcome to my third talk in the Paradise Delayed series. The first was about the cruel and ridiculous cult of the Jehovah's Witnesses in which I was reared. They are obsessed with this imminent end of the world, the Battle of Armageddon, when all who do not obey their every diktat will be murdered by God. The second explained how an apparently benign and open-minded churchman, the Archbishop of Canterbury, believes, by virtue of adherence to the Bible, a doctrine essentially the same, for all that the Archbishop's language overflows with humane and inclusive sentiments. Judgment Day and consigning unbelievers to hell was once a big theme in mainstream Christianity. It's hardly surprising, since it's so prominent in the Bible. That theme, however, has been so softly peddled in recent decades that you can imagine it's disappeared completely. This, my third talk, is about the Koran. The imminence of Judgment Day, when unbelievers will be cast into hellfire, is not simply another theme in the Koran. It is blared out on every page. The Koran means simply recitation, and the book of that name is the setting down in writing, some decades after his death, of the messages delivered to Mahomet from God via the angel Gabriel between the years 610 and 632, Mahomet's death. Mahomet was an Arab merchant who had met many Jews and Christians on his travels, and he'd heard many Bible stories. Now, anyone today claiming to hear messages from angels would meet with a lot of derision, and it was the same for Muhammad and his early followers. Thus, the Koran is full of warnings for doubters and mockers, and the warnings are stark. The rewards, though, for belief and obedience are repeated ad nauseam. Eternal life in a sensual paradise, but evidence, reason? There's none. Surah 83 illustrates this monotonous tone of bold assertion. On that day a barrier shall be set between them and their Lord. They shall burn in hell, and a voice will say to them, This is the scourge that you denied. The evildoers scoff at the faithful. They wink at one another as they pass by them. When they meet their own folk, they speak of them with jests, and when they see them, they say, these are erring men. But on Judgment Day, the faithful will mock the unbelievers. So, just as with the Jehovah's Witnesses in lumpy American English, or with the Archbishop of Canterbury in his sonorous, circuitous, and benign-sounding way, we have from the Koran the same message. God said it, believe it, act on it, or get zapped at the end of time. If the Day of Judgment, the end of the world, the mythical afterlife, are uppermost in one's consciousness, and this is the state of mind regular reading of the Koran would appear to promote, the problems of the here and now, the reality of this imperfect earthly life, can be submerged and, as for the witnesses, create an utterly irresponsible attitude. A believing witness is one who is proud to be contributing nothing to this doomed and wicked world, but instead spends every waking moment spreading the good news of the kingdom. A Muslim, stuffed full of analogous Quranic truths, will not only be focused on the end of the world or Judgment Day. The Quran is also explicit that violent jihad, as a means of spreading the faith whereby to purify humanity in readiness for the hour, is a sacred duty. Jehovah's Witnesses knock on doors armed with awful magazines. The Quran explicitly honours holy warriors and despises the stay-at-homes. Surah 8, verse 19. Allah revealed his will to the angels, saying, I shall be with you. Give courage to the believers. I shall cast terror into the hearts of the infidels. Strike off their heads. Maim them in every limb. Likewise, Surah 19, verse 20. This is a warning to anyone who imagines that so long as unbelievers continue to exist, you can be a quiet and peaceful Muslim. Do you pretend that he who gives a drink to the pilgrims and pays a visit to the sacred mosque is as worthy as the man who believes in the last day and fights for Allah's cause? Promoting the Quran as a divine creation is an encouragement to jihadists. If eternal paradise after Judgment Day is a reality, if this earthly life is to be despised, then being a holy warrior and martyr can seem a most rational career choice. Christianity, where it succeeds in being a force for good, be it in education, political lobbying, the arts, charity work, is able to do so only by virtue of ignoring some of the Bible's central and thoroughly gruesome themes. Islam, by virtue of the message and presumed status of the Koran, can also be seen as a force for good. But this can only happen, however, so long as the Koran is ignored all but completely. Yes, there are some positive teachings. When it focuses on this earthly life as opposed to some life to come, some injunctions are eminently civilized. Married women were no longer shackles. Inconvenient babies could no longer be abandoned in the desert. The command to give alms or zakat to the poor underpin what might be described as the world's first bureaucratic as opposed to family-based social welfare systems. The problems of Koranmolatry, however, do not end with its central themes of violent jihad and Judgment Day. Where Islamic law is based principally on the Koran, life can be as rough for believers as it is for infidels. Quranic rules of conduct for 3 areas of life must surely appear to people of all religions and none as primitive and barbaric. I refer to slavery as well as the treatment of apostates and thieves. Feminist Muslims will point out how advanced are the rules for marriage and women's property rights. Islam was centuries ahead of Britain, for example, in codifying the right of married women to own property or to initiate divorce. But how do Muslim feminists deal with this verse? 23:1. Blessed are the believers who restrain their carnal desires, except with their wives and slave girls. Now this verse suggests not only that carnal desire is a purely male concern, but that slave girls have no rights whatever. Well, this one. 24:2. The adulterer and the adulteress shall each be given 100 lashes. Such is the fate of the promiscuous who can't afford to keep slaves. In Christendom, we are largely ashamed of the murderous and barbaric crusading centuries when Muslims and Jews were slaughtered in the drive to recapture Jerusalem for Christ. The Arab and Ottoman Islamic regimes, we acknowledge, were more successful in managing a multi-faith community in the Holy Land. Muslims could not extinguish Judaism and Christianity. Instead, they forced them to pay a special poll tax. Ibn Khaldun was a 14th century Islamic scholar whose words are still revered today, and he is in no doubt of how a Muslim should deal with those of other Abrahamic faiths. All of them are unbelief. This is clearly stated in the Noble Koran. It is for them to choose between conversion to Islam, payment of the poll tax, or death. Even in the Afghanistan of Hamid Karzai, a hate figure for the Taliban, Muslim converts to Christianity have been sentenced to death. Where Islamic law prevails, one has to follow God's commands, as here in Surah 4, verse 81. Do not befriend the infidels until they have fled their homes in the cause of Allah. If they desert you, seize them and put them to death wherever you find them. And then there's the punishment for theft. As for the man or woman who is guilty of theft, cut off their hands. Yes, like the love and peace bits of the Sermon on the Mount in the Bible, you can find civilized bits in the Koran too. But to regard the laws and injunctions in the Koran as God-given and eternal is as horrific a prospect as imagining that a just society could be devised by sticking rigidly to the law of Moses. The ceremonial reverence for holy books by the peaceful, moderate Muslim mainstream lends legitimacy to those who choose to follow the teachings in the Koran to their logical conclusion. Apologist Islamic scholars will protest that the verses glorifying violent jihad, the references to slavery and amputation, must be read in context. The context was the early days of Islam, when slavery was a universal practice, justice brutal, and when that first Muslim community was mortally threatened and had to fight for its very survival. Once, however, this historical context argument is advanced, the whole sacred and eternal claims of the text evaporate. One might as well say that the Koran was written in an era when mention of angels talking to men, of jinns, of a six-day creation, of Judgment Day, of hellfire and paradise were also credible. And those primitive fancies too, along with violent jihad, slavery and amputation, can now be, well, safely ignored. Islamism is a label often applied to the philosophy of militant Muslims. Now that seems to be just a rather unconvincing attempt to try and ignore the commands to violent jihad, so boldly spelt out in the Koran, and thus one of the pillars of the faith. Dangerous and delusory belief systems is the theme of this series. So far I have dealt only with the people of the book, the Abrahamic religions. But the dream of a lost paradise predestined for restoration is not, however, exclusive to those who believe in a God. A similar, closely related, but godless fantasy was at the root of some of the most murderous regimes of the 20th century. I refer to Marxism. It's no coincidence that the late 20th century revival of militant Islam, with its longing for and faith in the advent of a perfect world after Judgment Day, followed almost seamlessly the demise of a faith in the perfect world that would follow, not the wiping out of the infidel by the Muslims, but the overthrow of the bourgeoisie by the workers of the world. The most prominent theatre of conflict involving militant Islam today is in Afghanistan. That was also the last territory acquired by the warriors of Islam's distant apocalyptic cousin, Marxism's most visible manifestation, the Soviet Union and its Red Army. The connection will be explained in my next bit. Thank you.